So, in the Week 9 class on linearity, we looked at demakes, games based on established IPs like Halo, Guitar Hero, and Bloodborne that were remade for much older hardware than they originally intended for. This gave us Halo 2600 for the Atari 2600, D-Pad Hero for the NES, and Bloodborne PSX for the PlayStation 1. They were used as examples of how aesthetics could be made from technological limitations, how technology that's outdated to the larger video game industry is still something that a lot of people value. But something that I noticed about those demakes was that a lot of them were unofficial. Sure, Halo 2600 was made by Microsoft's vice president of publishing, but even then, he doesn't own the IP. These are all, at the end of the day, fan creations. And it was explained to us that these creations aren't exactly illegal, but they can't be sold for a profit. So all of these are passion projects, similar to indie games, but indie games could at least make money. These demakes couldn't. And that intrigued me to dive deeper into this rabbit hole of fan creation. And what I found was a deep and influential history of fan games, hacks, and mods that's not often talked about. So, let's talk about them. For one, fan creations can oftentimes be so surprisingly well made that they become officially endorsed products. Valve, owners of Steam and formerly developers of video games, historically have been very lax with fans remixing their games. The Counter-Strike series, for example, originally started as a mod of Half-Life, developed by Min Guzman Lay and Jeff Cliff, before Valve hired the two and acquired the property. They've also allowed fan games like Black Mesa, a modern remake of Half-Life made by the Crowbar Collective, to be sold on Steam, essentially giving them their full seal of approval. The game DayZ famously began as a mod for Bohemia Interactive's Arma 2. The mod's creator, Dean Hall, was hired by Bohemia Interactive to work on a standalone DayZ game, but while DayZ was still a mod, Brendan Green, also known by his username PlayerUnknown, made a mod for the mod called DayZ Battle Royale. After that, he made an updated version of the mod for Arma 3 called PlayerUnknown's Battle Royale, and this mod would serve as the basis behind the game PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. See? That's where the name comes from. Isn't that cool? I thought that was cool. And with how incredibly popular DayZ and PUBG became, I think it's important to know their history as former mods. But fan creations can still hold their own even despite a lack of official recognition. The Aether mod for Minecraft was released back in 2011. It introduced a new world to the game. It took players to islands in the sky where they were greeted with unique creatures, architecture, and materials to gather. This mod was so popular that the poor kids playing Minecraft around the time, who watched their favorite YouTubers explore the Aether, didn't even know it was a mod. And when they tried to build a portal to the Aether themselves, tragedy struck. It was a true loss of innocence for many, like finding out Santa Claus wasn't real. Or it was for me, at least. There's also mods like Project M, a mod for Super Smash Bros. Brawl to change the game's physics and mechanics to be more in line with the game's predecessor, Smash Bros. Melee. The mod received praise from huge outlets like Wired and Kotaku, as well as millions of downloads. The mod became so popular, it even gained a large presence in national fighting game tournaments like the Big House series and Apex series. Unfortunately though, Project M was discontinued in 2015, citing fears of Nintendo shutdown. But the thing is with fan games is that they're in the hands of the people, not corporations. The mod is still easily accessible online thanks to tons of mirrors, and several successors still exist to continue the project unofficially, such as Legacy TE, Legacy XP, and Project Plus. On the internet, nothing ever dies. Then there are fan games that aren't so prestigious, but many of us might have grown up with. The browser games, the flash games, the ones on the shady unblocked games websites you'd go to during school after you finished all your assignments. Games like Mario 63, Pokemon Tower Defense, or the normal Mario Bros. Series, if you want to call it that. These games were rampant all over the internet before Flash met its maker, and while so many of them were crude and unusual, it was their ease of access that made them popular. Maybe as a young kid you had no money, no game consoles, only a home computer. Mario brutally murdering Goombas with a shotgun might be your only history with the series. That's a real possibility, whether Nintendo likes it or not. For some, a lot of these Flash games were a large part of their childhood. I know they were a part of mine. And whether they have any official recognition by Nintendo, Sega, or Capcom can't change that. They're parts of video game history too, for better or for worse. Oh god, turn it off. Then you have fan translations. Sometimes games are only made for one language and only released in one country. There are a large abundance of Japanese games, for example, that infamously never got localized anywhere else, such as Mother 3, most of the early Fire Emblem games, or Gattaken Kenji 2, otherwise known as Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth 2, or otherwise known as Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth otherwise known as Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth 2, or otherwise known as Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth Prosecutors it's such a tongue twister. Otherwise known as Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth 2, or otherwise known as Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth Prosecutor's Path. Both the only unlocalized Ace Attorney game and a real mouthful. These games are most often unlocalized because they're just not profitable anywhere else in the world, and the time and money it takes to translate them just wouldn't be worth it for these big companies. But leave it to fans to pour their blood, sweat, and tears into projects without asking for anything in return. Most games of a certain age that were unlocalized will have an English fan-made translation of some kind. It's an example of fan-made content that's not meant to expand upon or add content to the original games, but rather to make those original games more accessible. But it raises an important question, and that is, if you play a fan-translated game, are you playing the real game? Because localization is so much more complex than merely literally translating the words over. It's a cultural thing as well. There are concepts that just don't have a one-to-one translation in other cultures, and creative decisions have to be made for those translations. So there's an argument to be made that you're not actually playing these games, you're playing a fan's interpretation of these games. How can you know what was a carryover from the original game and what's brand new? How about puns, wordplay, alliteration? All those things can't be literally translated over, they have to be remade in English from the ground up. That puts them in this weird middle ground of being half official, half fan creation. Should they be allowed to count? Are you actually playing the real game? Well, those are the perfect kinds of questions to have a class about. What is or isn't a real game based on its official or unofficial status? Are fan-made works of art not art because they're not original? These are questions that make the history of fan creations incredibly important to discuss. And because fan creations are unofficial, they're often left behind when talking about video game history, regardless of how good they can actually be. Do we still need an official Nintendo-made Mother 3 localization if we already have a fan-made one that's completely free? Well, a lot of people still aren't satisfied with what we have. They'll only play Mother 3 if it's official. And if these weird middle ground games are so frequently ignored everywhere else, I think it's only fair they're at least remembered here in this course, where all histories, no matter how obscure, get some light shed on them. This class is defined by the plurality of its name, video game histories, not history, histories. Because nothing ever just has one history. To only look at industry history ignores the history of indie games. To only look at a history of success ignores a history of failures. And to only look at official games ignores a long history of fan creation. When looking at the various authors and theorists we've learned about in class to back my argument up, I came to realize that the best way to go about this was to see how it doesn't line up with theory. Because then it'd prove that fan creations are something new we've yet to properly explore in class. So let's go down the list here. Are fan works fragmentation? Well, this is neither an example of Jesper Juul's Casual Revolution or the indie game movement. Fan games are derived from existing games, whether they're industry standard, casual, or indie, doesn't matter. Gender and sexuality? Well, unfortunately, fan creations still suffer from that cultural hegemony. Gender. Their creators are still largely white and Asian men, so there's not a lot of correlation there. Are fan creations an example of Brett Camper's retro-reflexivity? They definitely can be. Older games are certainly easier and more accessible to mod, but that doesn't stop people from modifying modern games with modern styles all the time. National industries? Nope, this has nothing to do with industry. And while fan creations may be more popular in other countries, it's really not enough to lump this topic in with that week. What about materiality? Nope, not a shred. Fan creations almost represent the opposite of materiality. They usually exist entirely as code online. And then finally, afterlives. How video games are preserved after they've stopped being made. And this is one you could argue fan creations fit into. Fans take dead games and revive them by remixing their assets to create something new. But I'd argue this isn't preservation like keeping the game alive. Evaluating strategies for the preservation of console video games.
Describes. This is something else. Fan creation deliberately tears video games apart and rips out their assets to Frankenstein something new entirely. It's, if anything, the complete opposite of preservation, where the idea is to keep everything untouched as possible. So, yeah. Fan creations really don't have a module they can fit into that really gives them any time in the spotlight. And I think that's the best argument for why they should be a part of this class. These anomalous games and mods deserve to be talked about. They deserve discussion. They deserve respect. And yet they have no week dedicated to them. Well, that's just hogwash, I say. Hogwash. Give them their week or give me death. Okay, no, sorry, I'm going a bit overboard there, but still.
Fan creations are important. Fan-made game modes can become so popular they turn into fully fledged best-selling games. Mods can stand toe-to-toe with official releases. Flash games can scar children, and fan translations can let us have a peek into games never meant for our eyes. But when there's a copyright or trademark attached, fan works can seem dirty, associated with hacking and emulation and dubious legality, susceptible to a cease and desist at literally any moment. But they're more than that. They're their own history. There's a whole massive world of modders and hackers out there that many people just don't know about. But their work might be more influential than you think. And also, there's the Thomas the Tank Engine mod for Skyrim. So yeah, think about that, Mandiberg.
So this is all I've seen of this. Just this. Uh-oh. So far, pretty standard Mario gameplay with some, like, Mario All-Star sprites and fast Goombas. Whoa. Whoa. What? Did we just get gnomed? Are we corrupted? Are we aesthetic? Oh. Oh my god. Okay, so this is really well done.